Geek Therapy Radio.
How's it going, everybody? Hope you're doing well. Welcome to the Geek Therapy Radio podcast. I'm, of course, your mental curator, Johnny Hamburger. Didn't my nephew Spencer do wonderful on the last podcast / broadcast? I wish I was half as well spoken when I was 13 years old as Spencer is now. That boy has a very, very, very bright future. So the podcast upload schedule was a little wonk last week. Just to bring you up to speed a little bit, I apologize for that. We had a hurricane come Texas way. Hurricane Hannah. Thought it was just going to wind up being a tropical storm, but it built strength up until the last moment. Made landfall as a Category 1 hurricane. So about Wednesday last week, boss calls me up and says, "Hey, I've got you approved for overtime. We need you in on Saturday, to run the board at KTRH in case this hurricane hits us." And at the time, it was kind of tracking. It's really hard to track hurricanes and tropical systems and tropical storms and tropical depressions. They kind of have a mind of their own. They do and they don't. Anytime a tropical system makes it into the Gulf of Mexico, for those of you who are somehow unaware, maybe new listeners, I am based in Houston, Texas. Most recently, in 2017, we had Hurricane Harvey, and our city in region is quite gun-shy right now when it comes to tropical disturbances, especially in the Gulf of Mexico. So when Hannah was out there, at the time it was just a tropical depression. When Hannah was out there, boss says we need to come in on the weekend because we need our A-team running the board in case we go to long-form coverage, storm coverage, in case this thing hits Houston, builds strength, turns into hurricane, tropical storm, doesn't matter. Here's another thing. So I came into the weekend. My week got busy very quickly, and Friday, late week, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, I didn't have any time to record a podcast. And it was all about conservation of energy and keeping on top of the storm and communicating with the higher-ups as where they need me, what they need me for. I haven't run a shift on Saturday in a very long time. Long story short, it was very uneventful for Houston. Hurricane Hannah had tracked. It kept tracking increasingly westerly. So by the time it made landfall, I believe it was a little south of Corpus Christi. It was in between Brownsville and Corpus Christi. So Houston, for the most part, dodged a bullet. Hurricanes are big. Tropical storms are big. So we got a few outer bands of it. We got a little bit of rain. Nothing major in Houston. But regardless, I was busy. I was up here. I worked 6 days last week, which is not a huge complaint. You do what you got to do, and it's overtime. But yeah, that's why I didn't release a podcast on, was it Thursday or Friday? It was a little bit of a jack schedule. So I released the broadcast podcast a little bit early. I released that did I release it on Friday evening, I think? So that's that. One thing I wanted to mention, Nico, my coworker, mentioned this, and I had time to think about it a little bit. And yes, I'm going to get to Nintendo leaks in a moment. I'm going to timestamp it like I usually do. I want to talk about Nintendo and Analogue Pocket specifically in this podcast. But maybe some of you want to know, behind the scenes and what's going on with hurricanes, and you know what part of the world I'm in, and when there's hurricanes coming my way. Maybe if it's a little blurb in your news feed wherever you are in the world, who knows? But we are prone to hurricanes here on the Gulf Coast, naturally. Anyways, Nico came in on Friday night or Thursday night, and he says, this is what he said. He said, maybe it's wrong for me to wish this, or he asked, is it wrong to wish that it hit somewhere else rather than Houston? I feel bad. You say, I hope it hits north of Corpus Christi, or I hope it hits somewhere else rather than us. Is that douchey for me to say? And I thought about it a little bit because here's the thing. You wouldn't naturally wish for anybody else's struggle. You wouldn't ask it to hurt anybody else. You wouldn't ask it I would prefer it to cause harm to these people rather than us. You wouldn't actively wish for that. But my response, because I felt bad also when you're kind of mentally steering. For those of you who live in hurricane-prone areas, when you're kind of mentally steering a hurricane in your mind, saying, "Please don't hit us, go somewhere else," and you're just wishing it goes somewhere else. You're trying to put the other people out of your mind. You're trying not to think about all the people that it will impact if it doesn't impact you. The terms I've come to in that regard, with that idea, with that mentality of hoping it doesn't hit Houston and hoping it hits somewhere between, a less populated area. You're not wishing to cause harm in these people, but at the end of the day, here's my conclusion. The less suffering, the better. Maybe that if it doesn't hit 6 million people, it's better that it hits 50,000 people. It's better that 50,000 people are affected rather than 6 million, if that makes sense. Now, individually, it's all terrible. Somebody losing their home in a flood, someone taking on wind damage, all the different ways a hurricane can ruin somebody's life, at least temporarily, up to and including kill people. They can drown in a hurricane or theoretically and way less often be struck by flying debris. But usually in hurricanes, it's drowning. You wouldn't wish that kind of heartache and turmoil on anybody, but at the end of the day, if 50,000 people or 6 million people, it's it's not an easy choice to make. I mean, on paper it looks better. Scientifically, going by numbers, obviously it's a better outcome to choose less people suffering than more people suffering. But the question itself, the kind of ethical question itself is, are you wishing for those people to be hurt? At the end of the day, you are kind of hoping that they get hurt rather than you get hurt. Even though that the scientific data says less suffering is better, anytime you can minimize suffering, it's just statistically better. It's not a choice that any of us want to make. Months ago, anytime we talk about artificial intelligence, especially in regards to, or specifically in this case, talking about autopilot or any sort of driving assist or artificially intelligent controlled driving, autonomous driving, self-driving cars, Tesla autopilot and such, it's kind of an interesting theoretical exercise, mental exercise. Maybe you can call it a rhetorical question to ask, to ponder that the computer in this automatically driving car. Let's just use Tesla as an example. Let's say autopilot is in a Tesla. In Tesla, it's a very old theological question. The Tesla is headed towards a group of school children. There's 20 school children in a group that this car can just plow into. Or choice B, the computer is making this choice, an old lady with her walker on the left. So there will come a point in a lot of accidents if the self-driving car has to make this choice. The self-driving car is just going to go by the stats and by the numbers and say it's going to make the choice, a deliberate choice, plow into the old lady rather than plowing into the 20 school children. That's not a choice any human being wants to make. I believe the choice in what do you call it? Where am I going? Philosophy class it uses a train track, and a train is out of control, and there's a split coming up in the tracks. If you switch the track one way, the train will go plow into a school bus full of children. If you switch the bus the other way, it plows into an old lady or an old couple, or whatever. The point is that the person guiding the train is going to have to make that choice, and their choice is going to kill people. So it's an ethical conundrum. At the end of the day, the choice results in somebody dying. Now, you just looking by the numbers, and I can only peek inside my psychology and share my psychology with this a little bit. I would probably, just being honest, I would probably throw the switch to have the train or the car, well, in this case, a train, kill the two elderly people rather than smash into a school bus full of children. That's just me. Because in that split moment, I would have to take emotion out of it just for a split moment and choose what causes the least amount of suffering. What does the least amount of damage, causes the least amount of suffering. It's a horrible, horrible choice to make. You are still at the end of the day, I would still be choosing to have people die, but either choice is going to have people die. I'm just saying that in that moment, I would have to just go by the numbers. I am not going to plow into a school bus full of children. I would choose the less damage, even though it results in two elderly people dying in this scenario. It's not a choice anyone would ever want to make. It's kind of like a mother her kids are hanging off a cliff and she can only save one kid. That's an impossible choice to make. And thank God we don't have to make choices like that every day. Thank God that choices like that are rare. Some people, you could say, you have your dog dangling off a cliff and your own kid dangling off a cliff. You've had the dog for 12 years. This dog is a part of your life. It's a part of your family. You could argue that it's a family member. And then you have your kid who's 4 years old. You've known the dog longer than the kid. And it's an impossible question for a lot of pet owners. Would you drop the dog or save your kid? And I know I would hope that most people would answer the kid. And I know that makes me sound like an absolute monster. It's not an easy choice. But of course, most people, that's what I'm getting at with this. Dog lovers, dog owners who refer to their pets as children, as actual children, if they have an actual child and their pet, I would think that most people would choose their lifeblood, choose their own child. It's not a choice that they would ever have to logically make, and we kind of can be comforted in that fact that we're never going to have to make that choice of choosing between our old dog or our new child. It's just an interesting philosophical question, ethical question. I think a lot of people forced into that scenario would choose their kid. I think a lot of people forced into the scenario of plowing into a bus full of school children or an elderly couple is going to choose the elderly couple when it all just comes down to it at the end of the day. How we got onto this is I was talking about the hurricane, and you're kind of mentally steering the hurricane. I would rather, just for pure data and to minimize suffering in the world, have it affect 50,000 people than have it affect 6 million people. So you can say, but at the end of the day also, you can say, oh, well, Houston dodged a bullet here. Well, the Rio Grande Valley didn't. And there's a lot of people in the Rio Grande Valley, asylum seekers, immigrants. It's problematic. What's happening on the southern Texas border is problematic, and that's putting it lightly. A lot of people just intense trying to survive down there, and a hurricane going down there is not an ideal situation for those people just trying to eke out a better life. They've got more hope in a tent at the Texas border than they do in whatever drug cartel run city they're coming from. But it's terrible, and you don't wish for a hurricane to go down there and affect those people versus affecting 6 million people in Houston. But it's such a hard, I don't know why I'm talking about this. It's such an impossible decision to make. I wouldn't say impossible, a difficult decision to make. So anyways, let's rein it in here. That's what I've been up to the past several days, is dealing with the hurricane. Is it not going to hit Houston? I was on call. I was very busy working with that stuff. That's why didn't do the podcast release schedule as usual last week. But we're back on track now, at least. So the first thing I want to talk about, a little timestamp here around, maybe 15-ish, 14 and a half. The Nintendo leak. The massive, what do they call it? The GigaLeak? Yeah. Nintendo's massive GigaLeak. So much source code, not just source code for games all the way back to the SNES era. Not just source code, but internal emails and documents and CAD programs and development tools and all sorts of software and discussions and emails, internal emails, like I mentioned, between programmers and members of Nintendo. So much has been leaked. You may have seen some screenshots of Super Mario 64 using Luigi, because there was a 2-player mode that was abandoned, apparently, in Super Mario 64, where you could play as Luigi. So a lot of that code exists in the world. It was protected by Nintendo. It was on Nintendo's hard drives, I guess you could call it. All the code is contained by Nintendo, as it should be, because it's Nintendo's property. 100% it's Nintendo's property. Either just the IP, that is ideas being discussed in an email, or actual physical data on hard drives or discs or whatever. Anyways, a lot of it, a ton of it, an absolute ton of it, has been leaked. So homebrewers and emulation enthusiasts and everybody, it's compilable code. Apparently that's a big deal. It's compilable code. That means, mark my words, you are going to see an influx, just a dump of unauthorized, hacked Nintendo ROMs using Luigi, for instance, in Super Mario 64. There's other prototype games that never made it to development. I want to read one of them here. It says, this is from Ars Technica. I'll include the link. An original prototype named Super Donkey, featuring a Rayman style character in a Yoshi's Island style world. So I would say if it's a Yoshi's Island style world, that probably means, there's a little screenshot here, it probably means this was a game that was relying on the Super FX chip. Maybe not, possibly not, but there's probably more Super FX games in development that never got released that would possibly be included in this huge GigaLeak. I can't possibly tell you where to go to get all this, nor would I in a podcast, but it is a massive leak. And what I've been trying to come to terms with, or kind of start turning the gears in my mind about, is what this means for Nintendo, what this means for homebrew enthusiasts, what this means for Nintendo customers. Is this we can rule out that it's a good thing for Nintendo. It's absolutely positively not a good thing for Nintendo. I would rule that it's possibly a fun thing for the homebrew community, because I'll say the fun thing, not a good thing, because the fun things we do are often not good. That's part of what makes a lot of fun things fun, is that we know we shouldn't be doing them. So should this homebrew community be accessing this GigaLeak and releasing a whole bunch of hacked ROMs out into the universe for people to play? They probably shouldn't. Are they going to? Abso-friggin-lutely. Absolutely. It's already out there. They are going to release it. You're going to be able to put on your pirate's hat and find these ROMs. I'm sure of it. You're going to find them on YouTube channels showing prototypes for games that never were released. All of this stuff is going to come out. So for somebody who's fascinated by these things, like me, and I would imagine a lot of you listening, it is very fascinating. Yeah, I'm going to click on a video that's showing an old prototype Nintendo game that Nintendo never released. I'm going to click on it because I'm curious. A lot of us are curious about this stuff. It's kind of like a historical, I don't want to call it like a Rosetta Stone, but it's fascinating to see like the mental process at Nintendo, the minds of Nintendo, the creative minds specifically. That's what I'm most fascinated about. What characters might be well known today? This Donkey, what is this called? Donkey Man? No, what is it? Super Donkey? This character looks kind of weird. He's a weird looking dude, but it looks like something that could have caught on. Could have been a well-known brand ambassador other than Mario, for Nintendo, or Sonic the Hedgehog for Sega. This Super Donkey dude could have been another entire franchise. Could have spun off many sequels, Super Donkey 1, 2, 3, 4, and could have been a whole thing. But it got canned for whatever reason. It's just fascinating to see that it does exist. But back to the question of how this is going to affect Nintendo, how this is going to affect the homebrew community, how's it going to affect the consumer. So I just mentioned that the homebrew community is just going to feast on this. It's just going to be an absolute smorgasbord feast. It's going to be very interesting to see all the things that the homebrew community is going to come up with and discover with this Nintendo GigaLeak. Now let's move over to how this is going to affect Nintendo. And I, like anybody else talking about this subject, can only speculate. I can only give my opinion on this. I can't give hard, fast details. But we're going to start with Nintendo itself, the company of Nintendo itself, before moving on to the consumer. That is you and I who purchase Nintendo Switches and go to the eShop and purchase the Nintendo store or whatever and purchase games and download digital content for our Nintendo Switch, how that's going to affect us. But let's start with the company because it's all tied together. The company is going to be hurt by this. Is Nintendo going to go under? Heck no. Absolutely not. I do not think Nintendo is going to have a long-lasting economic ordeal over this. And the reason I say that, because I know some of you listening might be like, Johnny, this is a huge hit to Nintendo. This could affect them a lot, and it could be a very, very bad thing for Nintendo. They could lose a lot of money on this, however other ways this is going to manifest negatively for Nintendo. And you're right. I think that it will manifest negatively for Nintendo in the short run. For people who follow Nintendo and kind of know the history of Nintendo, more than just that they're over 100 years old, but the financial situation of Nintendo, that Nintendo has saved so much money that they can produce failure after failure after failure, and they have so much in savings wisely. Nintendo as a company has saved so much money, they can afford to put out duds for decades. They can afford to put out the Virtual Boy. They can afford to put out the Wii U. They can put out unsuccessful systems and experiment and tinker. 3D technology on the 3DS. 3DS is very popular, but you get what I'm saying. They had that luxury of tinkering, experimenting, and doing these things because they have so many billions of dollars saved up as a cushion, as a safety net. So will this hurt Nintendo in the long run? In my opinion, no. Will it hurt Nintendo in the short run? In my opinion, yes. And that brings me to the consumer. How will this GigaLeak affect the consumer? That is, you and me, who purchases Nintendo products and software. For the consumer, just off the top of my head while I'm recording the podcast now, I don't foresee any massive inconvenience to the consumer. Other than I think we are going to see system updates for the Switch and any future Nintendo console more frequently. If you don't think they're already frequent enough, I think after this giant GigaLeak, I think we are going to see them tighten up even more than they are. Anybody who knows Nintendo also knows how extremely litigious, they like to sue people. I can't pronounce it. Litigious? Nintendo really, really likes to sue people. Maybe like is a strong term, but Nintendo is well known to be very sue happy. And you bet your friggin' bottom dollar that the lawyers are at Nintendo, that the legal department at Nintendo right now is worked up into an absolute frenzy. And just an absolute madhouse over at Nintendo Legal right now. We are about to see, this doesn't affect the consumer so much in as much as Nintendo already doesn't put on much of a sale on any of their games. It's always $60. You want to download Legend of Zelda? Not Legend of Zelda. You want to download Zelda for Nintendo Switch? It's still $60. It's still $60. They rarely ever go down in price from their top sellers. So I think it's not going to affect the consumer that much, other than we're just going to see less sales. We're going to see more updates to your software, firmware updates and such. It's just going to get a little bit more annoying, I think. But those I guess this brings me back around to homebrewers and YouTubers and content creators that are using Nintendo property, in their videos. I think that Nintendo, that is already copyright strike happy, we are going to see a bloodbath. I'll just on YouTube as an example. I think we're about to see a bloodbath like we've never seen before from Nintendo. I think if you even hum a Nintendo song, na 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 na, sue. I think if you even make a reference to Mario in a YouTube video, I think it's going to catch. It already does. I have this conspiracy theory. About Nintendo and YouTube, and it's why I don't upload a whole lot of content having anything to do with Nintendo on YouTube. I think that the mere mention of the word Nintendo or Mario or Luigi or Peach or friggin' Stunt Race FX or Star Fox or Donkey Kong, if you mention any sort of intellectual property of Nintendo on YouTube, I think the algorithm picks it up and Nintendo is immediately notified. I don't think that's too much of a conspiracy theory. I think that anytime anyone mentions or shows anything that resembles anything close to Nintendo intellectual property, that it hits the algorithm so hard that Nintendo gets an immediate alert on all their cell phones. All their lawyers do. An immediate text message. Retro whoever on YouTube said the word Mario, and I think all the lawyers, bing, just right on their phone. Oh, here's a link to it. Get on it. So I think that it's going to become absolutely apocalyptic for content creators. The hoops that you're going to have to jump through to get clearance from Nintendo to review their products, to review their games even, to talk about their games even, it's going to clinch like an iron fist and become almost impossible. And so what I think is going to happen is you're going to see only the top echelon, and still just using YouTube as an example here because it's the biggest video platform, and this is going to go over to Twitch as well. 100% is going to apply to Twitch as well. You are only going to see the top echelon of content creators putting out anything having to do with Nintendo. This is just my opinion, and I could be 100% wrong. If you disagree with me, geektherapy@iheartmedia.com. That's the email. Or go to the Facebook page, Geek Therapy Radio on Facebook, Geek Therapy Radio Instagram, Geek Therapy Radio on Twitter, all that good stuff. geektherapyradio.com. Fill out the contact form. Let me know if you disagree with with my opinion here. But I think you're only going to see those who have 10 million subscribers that Nintendo's not even going to flex with YouTube creators or content creators or Twitch streamers with less than 1 million, 2 million subscribers. That if you aren't a Marquez Brownlee, that if you aren't a Linus Tech Tips, that if you aren't a Ninja, you are not going to be allowed to talk about Nintendo. Or you will be able to talk about Nintendo, but it's not going to be monetized, and it's going to hit the algorithm adversely. That if you're a smaller channel, let's say you have 200,000 subscribers on YouTube, and you mention Nintendo, I guarantee you those videos aren't going to work very well. That it's going to hit the algorithm with this red flag word, Nintendo, or any property of Nintendo, Mario, and it's going to be hidden from people. Not completely hidden, not that your video is going to be taken down by YouTube, just that the algorithm isn't going to put it in front of people like it usually does. That the only way it's going to get to work is if, let's say, Austin Evans does a review of the next model of Nintendo Switch or something like that. They're going to have to clear it all through Nintendo and YouTube's going to manually have to go in there and bypass that anti-Nintendo algorithm for a big channel like Austin Evans or a big Twitch following like Ninja. Is Ninja back on Twitch yet? I don't know. Who's the biggest streamer on Twitch? It's going to be a bad time for smaller content creators wanting to do anything with a Nintendo product. Not just new Nintendo products. I'm talking people tinkering with old Game Boys. That some channels, smaller channels, or even some bigger channels that aren't big enough to get full clearance from Nintendo are going to start straying away from, or at least understand that if they put out a video of restoring an old Game Boy, that it's going to hit the YouTube algorithm negatively, and that video is not going to do as well. Even if it's something just like replacing the button cell battery in an old Pokemon cartridge. So we're going to possibly see less content regarding Nintendo. There's a lot of YouTube channels right now that are putting out their hot takes and their opinions on what's going on with the Nintendo GigaLeak right now, and I think we're seeing that hot and heavy right now because I think the storm's coming from Nintendo. That apocalypse is going to rain down upon content creators all over the world. And God rest the soul of the small channel that's going to put up footage of a ROM hack from the GigaLeak. Get while the getting's good, I guess. For right now, Nintendo is going to come down on it. Nintendo and I'll finish up with this thought. I'll reiterate, Nintendo that is already notoriously sue happy and notoriously protective of their IP. It's going to be so much. You didn't think it could get worse. It's going to get so much worse. So much worse. I think a lot of us, and it's funny because I'm going to talk about the Analogue Pocket next, which is crazy. I think for a lot of us Nintendo fans, fans at this point, if you have grown up and lived long enough to have grown up with Nintendo, I think those of us who are in our 30s and 40s, possibly 50s, early 50s maybe, who've grown up with Nintendo through the 80s and 90s and thereabouts, we kind of have the Stockholm syndrome now. I don't want to call it, maybe it's not like that. Maybe it's not that we don't feel that we love our captor. But at the very least, we've accepted what Nintendo is and what Nintendo isn't, and we've learned to operate within those boundaries. That as long as you're okay with, as long as you're mentally accept that when you buy a Nintendo Switch, for instance, you are never going to buy Zelda for less than $60. You're never going to be able to buy Super Mario Odyssey for less than $60, or I should caveat that and say very rarely. As long as you operate within Nintendo's garden, as long as you behave yourself with Nintendo, everything's great. The games are absolutely great, no denying that. Mario Kart, Super Mario Odyssey, everything, almost everything Nintendo puts out first party are just stellar games. Pokemon, of course. But you play how Nintendo means for you to play it, and everyone's happy. The moment you go outside of what Nintendo expects from you, you're gonna have a bad time. That means that you can play Pokemon and tell your friends how fun Pokemon is, but if you go onto YouTube or create any content using Pokemon as intellectual property, Nintendo's going to have an eye on you. Ooh, be careful. Be careful what you say here. And that part of it is going to get so much worse. So much worse. That's all I got to say about that. Let's move on to the Analogue Pocket, which I'm very excited about. The Analogue Pocket was announced last fall, and as a matter of fact, I went back to look up the date of the podcast. I mentioned it, and I uploaded a podcast about it titled The Analogue Pocket ... I want it now, in all caps and 3 exclamation points. I was very excited about it then, and I'm very excited about it now. I uploaded that on October 17th, 2019. The duration is 26 minutes and 50 seconds. I have periodically, over the past several months since last October, checked Analogue Pocket's website over and over to see if we had any developments on this system, on this retro emulation system, and it's been pretty quiet for the past several months up until recently. Today we have more look at the Analogue Pocket, including possibly the most important part. Well, I struggle to say most important. But the Analogue Pocket's pre-order program starts August 3rd. So that's Monday, August 3rd, and it's for the $200. So we knew it was going to be $200. We didn't have any official pre-order date set. Now we know that it's Monday, August 3rd. You can plunk down your $200 pre-order for your Analogue Pocket. Now, unfortunately, unfreaking-fortunately, the original release window was going to be 2020, towards the end of 2020, but that's now being pushed back to May 2021, so spring of next year. And I can only imagine, I haven't seen anywhere that mentions this specifically, but I can only imagine part of that reason why they're pushing it back to next year, spring of next year, is due to the pandemic. Maybe it's harder to source components. It probably played into it somewhat. You know that it definitely played into it somewhat. So the moral of the story here is you can pre-order it August 3rd, which is next Monday, I believe, and it's $200 to pre-order, but you won't. The earliest you possibly even get it would be spring of 2021. So this says May 2021. All that technically means is when they would begin shipping. I don't know how many of you have backed, other projects on Kickstarter, for instance. I have backed one or two of GPD Pockets, of GPD's products. So I have the GPD Win and the GPD Pocket. They're both a couple years old. They're not the newest ones. Shipping, when it says start shipping on a certain date, that doesn't mean you're going to get it a few days after that. I mean, it could, if you're lucky, you could. They usually go in order of who backed first. So if you get in early, you get the part of the first shipments. But there's a lot of people that were waiting several months for the GPD Pocket. I remember that. I remember that I got one of the first rounds of shipments, and I was super excited. And then for several months after, people, okay, we're getting to lot number this. Okay, we're finally getting to backers who backed us on this date. And There's a lot of to do with it, and a lot of waiting around. So, anyways, we could start seeing them in the wild as soon as May 2021. But I'm not holding my breath. Things always get pushed back. If things get pushed back once, they usually get pushed back again, in my experience. You know how I feel about the James Webb Deep Space Telescope. I don't even like talking about that. It makes me salty. So I want to go over the specs a little bit. We learned a little bit more about some of the nitty-gritty specs and components that they're using in this, and I want to bite into the meat on that bone. As we all knew, those of us who cared anyways, know that the display resolution is 1600 by 1440 pixels. That's very high definition. Why that's important is Game Boy, for instance, operates at a native resolution of 160 by 144. So this is literally 10 times that resolution. And the reason why that's important is that scaling, at least for Game Boy games, and I believe Game Gear games are at the exact same resolution, the scaling is going to be perfect. It's going to be perfect multiples of 160 by 144. Now, since it's using an IPS display and it emulates other systems as well, like the Atari Lynx, which has a different resolution, Neo Geo Pocket, which has a different resolution, the fact that you get such deep blacks with an IPS display in such a high resolution means that you have all those pixels to play with. You can display that exact amount of pixels and even have some wiggle room to get the scaling looking pretty. Get some exact scaling going on. Now, it may not feel the screen edge to edge and blah, 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 but you have the more pixels, the more scaling options you have, basically. So every retro system is going to look great on the Analogue Pocket. Also, what that means, 1600 by 1440, which is super high definition, means that shaders are going to look awesome. Emulating CRT scan lines, whatever filters you're going to put on the games to emulate the actual system, it's going to look great. Higher resolution means that it's going to be awesome for filters, if you like to use filters. I usually don't like to use filters, but if you have enough resolution, you can get some. I love doing CRT filters. There are some awesome awesome filters that you can use in a lot of emulators that looks so good. You have to have a fairly decent video card, fairly decent system. It is a tax on your system, so you're not going to be applying, an LCD filter to your Game Boy games being emulated on like an old netbook or an old dual core or whatever with no graphics card, just running on Intel's integrated graphics. You're not going to have a great time with that. But if you have a good graphics card and a good CPU, you can use some awesome filters, and you need high resolution for that. And that's one reason why 1600 by 1440 here on the Analogue Pocket is going to be oh so great. So the glass, if you haven't seen the Analogue Pocket, it is a gorgeous looking piece of hardware. It looks like a Game Boy. I mean, obviously that's what it's trying to look like. It has shoulder buttons and 4 face buttons and a D-pad and all sorts of good stuff. But the form factor is Game Boy. That's just what it is. That's what it's looking like. So the glass on it, it's not a plastic screen. It's glass. It's 1.5 millimeter Gorilla Glass on top of the 3.5-inch LTPS LCD display. It's going to look gorgeous. Gorgeous. One of the best things you can do. I've done a video on this. Many people have done. Like the first mod you do to a vintage Game Boy. Let's say you buy a Game Boy off of eBay or whatever. One of the first things you should do to it is put a glass screen cover on it. Peel off. It's relatively easy. Peel off the old plastic, scuffed up, scratched up original Game Boy plastic screen cover and put in a nice glass, scratch-resistant reproduction screen cover. It makes it look great. The clarity that you get from using high quality glass instead of plastic on a Game Boy or Game Boy Pocket or any Game Boy Advance, whatever, is remarkable. So the fact that it has a 1.5 millimeter thick Gorilla Glass is awesome. It should be very, very resilient. I want to move down the list here to some other specs. The battery is 4,300 milliamp hours, should be good for about 6 hours at what Analogue Pocket calls the default brightness. So your mileage may vary. It's USB Type-C charging. I think the battery life's pretty good, and given that there's no shortage of USB Type-C chargers around in the wild today, I think you'll be fine with that. I think it's generous and it's easy to charge. 4,300 milliamp hour battery. What I really want to get to, the whole reason I'm going over this is because we have better looks at the internals. So yes, the analog dock is also going to be open for pre-order. It's $100. It's a Type-C interface that allows you to hook up through HDMI. It has 2 USB ports on it, Bluetooth for multiplayer on the games that support same screen multiplayer. But there's an option there. So that's available also for $100. You can hook it up to a DAC. You can even hook it up to, it says, what does this say? Connected to an analog DAC to play nicely with CRT displays. Great. Okay, so yeah, if you're using composite, I can't see if it's RG, if it's component output, probably not, maybe, hopefully. That'd be cool if it was component output, but or VGA or something. Though I kind of doubt it. We'll see about that. I don't have a clear picture of what the analog output's going to be like. We do know HDMI for darn sure, using the dock at least. So, internals, as far as the FPGA and all that. So here we go. The bullet points, and I'll include this link also from Ars Technica. Altera Cyclone V FPGA with 49,000 logic elements and 3.4 megabits of B-RAM. It's a small b, 3.4 M small b of B-RAM. The other FPGA, because there's 2, is an Altera Cyclone 10 with 15,000 logic elements. There will be 2 cellular RAM 16 megabytes cells for a total of 32 megabytes of low latency memory, each independently addressable. 16-bit data bus width, a 1x synchronous DRAM 64 megabyte module with a data bus width of 16 bits, and 1x asynchronous SRAM 256 kilobytes with a data bus width of 16 bits. So, interesting point here about all the different RAM usage. And I am not a professional when it comes to RAM modules and what different use cases, volatile memory and static RAM and all that kind of stuff. I can only imagine that part of the reason why there's a mismatch of static RAM and active RAM, or I don't know what the terms are, but the different mix and match of RAM is that there's going to be a sleep mode. There will be a sleep mode, and it says it's for games that don't support saving states, save state functions that you can put if you don't want to be just chewing through the battery, you can put the console to sleep. I would imagine there's some sort of swapping of memory between the RAM modules for that function, so that when you boot the system device up again, you just press power and go right back in your game. That is going to very quickly swap the data from one RAM, the program information from one set of RAM to another set of RAM. That is my perception, at least. That is my explanation, my theory as to why they're using all the sorts of different RAM chips, not to mention just all the different emulation possibilities and homebrew possibilities. This is going to be a homebrew tinkerer's dream, a homebrew programmer's dream. There's the SD card slot in the side. Ooh, I can't wait for the Analogue Pocket. $200 though? Man, I got a kid on the way. I want it so bad. I want it. It's going to be a Christmas list item for me. Definitely going to be a Christmas list item. But I am so excited about it. Anyways, that's going to wrap it up for Geek Therapy Radio. Hope you enjoyed it today. Be good to each other. You are worthy of love, both giving and receiving love. Please remember that. And you are also worthy of your own self-confidence. Please embrace your inner geek. Share your inner geek with others. It might inspire others to be a geek about your geek thing. And a little spreading of joy in this world will go a long way, especially right now. So thank you so much for listening. You are loved, and I will catch you next time.